Hi, this is Rachel from the Shades of Orange. Christmas is fast approaching, so I wanted to do a recommendation video for some Christmas reads. However, if you're like me, you'll find that the majority of Christmas books are all contemporary romances, and I don't read a lot of those genres, so I found myself looking for some alternative Christmas stories that are maybe set around the holidays, but are a little bit darker, a little bit creepier, and this is the list I came up with. Hopefully I can give you some ideas what you should pick up, and I'll let you know what I'm currently reading this year. First, I want to recommend NOS4A2 by Joe Hill. This is a horror/thriller book about a creepy old man who basically steals away children from their parents and takes them to Christmas land, hence the seasonal connection. And within the book, there's a lot of references to jingle bells and holidays, shopping and gifts and all of that. It's definitely a thrilling novel. The main character has some fantastical powers where she's able to find lost things. It really is a cross between horror and fantasy, but it's all set around the holidays. A lot of people seem to read this book during Halloween, which is when I first read it. But I actually think it would be even more fun to read around Christmas because it almost would be creepier when you're reading the story and Jingle Bells is actually playing on the radio. So I think this would be a great book to read or reread over the holidays. I read it as an audiobook, which I thought was fantastic, so absolutely have to recommend that one. Next, I want to recommend Don't Turn Off the Lights by Bernard Miner, and this is a book I did receive from the publisher St. Martin's in exchange for an honest review. And this is a book about a young woman who on Christmas Eve receives a note from someone who is about to commit suicide, but it doesn't appear like the note is addressed to her, and she has no idea who wrote it, so she starts trying to uncover who sent this note, is it a mistake, and then from there she starts to get into this almost cat and mouse game, and the stakes get really crazy and thrilling, and she basically realizes that someone is watching her. This is a very dark book. There's a lot of trigger warnings in it for sexual violence, harm to animals, but in terms of intensity, it was awesome. Definitely a darker story. It's really not about Christmas, but it's set around the Christmas holidays, so if you want those mentions of gifting and trees, but aren't really into the whole seasonal Santa Claus thing, this is a perfect one to pick up. It's definitely a gripping, intense story, and could be, your next Christmas read. Next, I want to recommend Snow Angel by James Thompson. This is a book set in Finland around Christmas, and what's really interesting is because it's set so far up north, at that time of year they virtually have no sunlight, so it's 24-hour darkness. So again, it makes for a very dark story. There's a lot of depression and suicide that naturally happens at that time of year in places like Finland, just because they don't have that sunlight. It's a very depressing place to be. And this story is about a young woman who is murdered and the detective trying to track down her murderer. Again, very dark story. It was actually, very violent, very graphic. It's very explicit kind of what happens to this woman. But I found the story absolutely gripping. I read it during the summer and I loved it regardless. So I think it would be so much better to read in the cold winter months. So much of it takes place outside and talks about those freezing temperatures, the darkness, and I think this would be a perfect book to read around the Christmas season. Next, I want to recommend The Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens. Yes, this is a classic that everyone knows about. I think everyone knows the premise about the main character Scrooge. But the reason I want to mention it is that I was surprised how creepy this book actually is. I did not read it until last year, was the first time. I actually read it as an audiobook, which was a fantastic experience. And even though I knew the story from watching A Muppet Christmas Carol and other children's editions, when I actually read the physical book or the audiobook, I realized that it's a really dark, creepy story about ghosts. And with the narration, it was just a really haunting story. And even though it's a classic, I think a lot of you have read it. If you have not, it's a great darker story to pick up if you don't want a cutesy contemporary story. And again, I think the narration really pops it up even another level. So even if you've read it before, maybe look at getting an audiobook version of it, because that was awesome. Now, if you've read The Christmas Carol too many times, I can offer an alternative, and that is Batman Noel, which is a graphic novel retelling of The Christmas Carol, and it takes all the characters from the Batman universe and puts them into the different roles within the Christmas Carol story. And this is fantastic because I find Batman as a superhero to be one of the darker characters, and I really thought the writers of this retelling did a really good job of taking a fresh take, kind of mixing up which characters played which roles. And I just found it really refreshing. The artwork is very well done, very detailed, great colors. And it's just a really fun retelling that I don't think a lot of people have necessarily read, so I'm going to recommend that one. Last, I want to mention the book that I am currently reading this year. This is my darker alternative Christmas book. I've just started it, so I can't technically recommend it, but so far so good. And that is Dying for Christmas by Tammy Cohen. I understand this book's been out for a couple years in the UK, but it just came out in North America. And it's a story about a woman who goes shopping, meets a handsome, attractive man, and decides to go for a drink with him. And he ends up kidnapping her, and in the 12 days before Christmas, I understand he's giving her very creepy gifts. Again, I'm very early in, but I'm enjoying the first couple chapters, and this sounds like the kind of fun, suspenseful story I love to read. I love reading kidnapping stories, and I think this is a great mix of a seasonal read with the stabby parts that I personally love reading about in books. So those are my recommendations for some alternative, darker Christmas stories. If you have other recommendations, please leave them down below, or let me know what are you picking up this year to get you in the holiday mood. Thanks so much for watching. I'll talk to you again soon. Okay, bye.